kick things off with one question for Rakesh. I'm sorry, for Tarek, my apologies. IoT devices now connect to each other and to their host systems using a variety of standards, ranging from Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, cellular, Zigbee, Z-Wave, and others. Of these interfaces, which do you expect to dominate the market? And will we see yet another new interface taking place in this challenging area, or will there be too much congestion taking place with all these radios talking to each other?
Thanks, Dave. I think the question of standards is really key, because at the end of the day, if you look at IoT, it existed many, many years ago, and we've had embedded solutions, as we talked about, since the early 90s, and Freescale participates in that today. So to me, how IoT is different is about coming up with the right standards and allowing heterogeneous devices and gateways in the cloud to talk to each other. I think from my perspective, it's still early days. There's still a bit too many protocol candidates out there. The industry needs to focus on specifically what are the top one or two protocols that need to be driven, and driven pretty hard in the various areas, right? Connectivity being one, security is another key area as far as the new standards that are required for the IoT to really take off. On the connectivity side, it may not be just one, okay, so it could be a lower end solution like a Zigbee class. For the higher end, it'd likely be a Wi-Fi type of solution, right? So a combination of these two will be the main connectivity piece. On the security side, I'll give you the security spin from a chip company. Having the protocol was key, but also having the right APIs and the API standards had to be available for the industry to start adopting security. If you look at IPsec, SSL, they've existed for many, many years, but they just took too many CPU cycles for them to be deployed, and there was too many proprietary ways of using the acceleration engines that were in the chips. And as soon as API standards got standardized, we saw the use of security in SoCs take off, and that's just an example. Dave.
Okay. Another question here for Gary. Have him address some points here. The IoT area, in my mind, has sort of become the Wild West of security, and with most of the devices currently having little or no layers of embedded security. What can the semiconductor suppliers or the developers of the chips and software for the IoT applications do to improve security without overburdening the user, and yet provide substantial protection from hackers?
Wow, great question. So the short answer is, take a look at what IronKey did with their USB sticks. That's it. So the Pentagon, everybody puts a USB stick down on a table, right? And it happens to be infected with malware. And in the Pentagon, a few sticks were placed there by malicious insiders. Who knows? And so people would pick up the USB stick. Oh, I got a free USB stick in the early days. Let me just stick it in my Windows XP computer and infect the whole network with zero-day malware that eavesdrops. Oops. So that was an opportunity, kind of like this one, to say, hey, let's put the crypto in a chip on the USB stick. Let's separate memory. Let's put the password of the user who owns the stick in a special secret area of memory. Make it really, really hard for anyone to accidentally stick this USB stick in a computer and infect everyone. So the crypto was in there. It was proprietary, but standards are great. I think the concept of what IronKey did in a USB stick can be, we can learn a lot from them for IoT.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions from the audience? Open for questions here. No one's lined up with a mic or raises their hand.
So we were talking about the wireless schemes and putting away the standards. I have a radio, AM radio. I listen to the Giants game, which should probably be going on, and I always wonder if it's too close to my laptop, I get all this interference, and I always wonder, how dangerous is it for me? And now with the IoT coming on, I would love to know if you have any comments about we're going to have all these connected devices if we don't already have a lot of, that's called frequencies running around our body. Anybody looking at that and the future of how this applies to our health, to our children's health, and so on.
So living in the RF storm, basically. Correct, maybe you can address that.
I think if we look at this, back when Motorola, which is where I used to work, introduced the cell phone, there were scares about the level of radiation that emanated from that. I think we got to kind of put aside that fear, and as long as we're managing the level of radiation coming out of these devices, we're going to be, I think, in reasonably good shape. You also mentioned the interference piece. I think the interference piece is key, and making sure that we're assigning the right wavelengths for the right devices, and making sure that they don't interfere with 3G, 4G spectrum. There's a lot of work that needs to happen on this forum as well.
Excuse me, just one point that with the PCs and so on, the shielding in the PCs is not very strong, so there's a lot of RFI that tends to escape there, especially from the switching on the LCD screens or other displays. So that's just something you have to live with an AM, especially for an AM radio. FM is not so bad, but AM is pretty disastrous when you try and listen to it. Okay, anybody else have a question? Otherwise, I have a couple more points to raise.
Is there any chance we're going to see 2D technology and materials overcome node shrink for applied materials?
So 2D materials is an area of intense activity in the industry and academia. But I believe it is probably 5 to 10 years away from practical implementation. There could be some applications of that in the near term if you take graphene, for example, as a constant conducting electrode. But I think for electronics industry, it might be a little further away, but certainly they're on the roadmap beyond 10 nanometers as we look at different device architectures. And it's a whole lot of activity in academia. In fact, every university group that was doing carbon nanotubes has moved away to 2D materials now.
Okay. Anybody else? We have a couple more questions here that I think will maybe raise some other eyebrows. Today, lithium-ion batteries have become the workhorse for many of the portable devices that we use. What do you think will be the next workhorse technology that replaces or complements the lithium-ion batteries? And which market areas do you expect will be the early adopters?
So if you look at lithium-ion batteries today, they are somewhere around energy densities. State-of-the-art batteries are about 610, 620 watt-hours per liter. The theoretical limit is going to be about 700 watt-hours per liter. And it's a very large industry, tens of billions of dollars today. And if you look at, let's say, a battery device for an electric vehicle, there is a whole lot of cost and a whole lot of volume associated with battery management system compared to the battery itself. So this idea of solid-state batteries is about 20 to 30 years old. Initially researched at Oak Ridge National Labs. And the fundamental limitation for that was to come up with manufacturing technologies that are robust and at the same time that can drive the cost. So you see quite a bit of activity. Several startups in the United States and outside are looking at this, and we are certainly looking at it. And this certainly has the potential to take it to double the energy density of lithium batteries. As with any of the new battery technologies, you don't quite go to electric vehicles first or grid storage first. You look at consumer electronics, in this case we're looking at wearables. We are looking at markets, this is very unique. If you're actually looking at, as I was talking about, a contact lens, for example, you really don't want to put a lithium battery in your eye. So there are some unique applications. You want to take this technology and drive the adoption, and at low energy densities, the cost is competitive today, then you bring the scale, you drive down the cost of the technology and make it a solution for other industries as you go forward. But the benefit is that very high energy density, thin form factor, very high operating temperature range, no liquids, so it's not flammable. So there are a whole lot of benefits. Bring manufacturing technologies, get it adopted, drive down the cost, and move up the value chain.
Thank you. Yeah. Any call for questions?
Do you have any comment on the progress on the dual carbon battery from Power Japan Plus?
I'm afraid I don't know much about it.
Okay, I was just, might be interesting to look at.
Yeah.
Okay, I have one last question. Rakesh, I can't let you get away without answering one. So, IoT device developers require components that consume little power, are highly integrated, deliver high performance, and of course are low cost. These are the criteria that are the mantras of these semiconductor companies that we've seen over the years. But what else can they do to further accelerate the IoT market? Should they accelerate the pace of process development, develop more specialized processes, or what?
You know, I have Om sitting right next to me, and if I tell them you really don't need to push process technology a lot faster, I risk getting hurt by Om sitting right next to me again. But I think, you know, the IoT process technology will keep continuing to shrink, however difficult it is. From an IoT perspective, if you look at what's required now and potentially in the next year, 2 years, it's not the compute, right? It's sensing, compute, right, and connectivity all working together. So how do you accelerate that? Firstly, for companies, you need to make sure that you make it easier for your buyers to integrate that into whatever they are developing. And so what that means is, instead of just trying to sell point solution, try to sell subsystems with software so that they can integrate it into their particular applications. Create an ecosystem strategy. Second thing is, again, there's a lot of uncertainty in the technology today, right? Which technology is going to win, especially from a wireless perspective. We had a little bit of a discussion earlier about that. But, you know, try to drive standards. As soon as you can try to drive standards, have a common standard, or at least agree on one or two key standards, adoption will increase, R&D spend will increase. The third thing which we say is, Tariq mentioned this, things moving to software, right? Because you need to hedge right now because technology isn't that mature, try to see whatever you can pull from the hardware layer to the software layer, right? And that gives you configurability. The fourth thing which I'd say is, it's not about always selling the device. Think about in which vertical you can sell IP, right? And again, the way to win in this market, especially with all the new applications of this technology, is to sell solutions. And you can make a lot of money if you sell solutions.
Does that mean that the semiconductor supply should move up in the supply chain a little bit more to be more of a system solution as opposed to component supplier?
That's a really good question. What we're saying is, from our perspective, there is an opportunity for semiconductor companies to develop an ecosystem like they haven't developed in the past. Previously, the mode was, let's go alone, and then sooner or later, it's a race to the bottom in terms of prices. Right? What we think should happen is, you need to think of this play as an ecosystem play. Try to see what's core for you, what's context for you, build the partnerships, right? And then figure out what sort of a supply chain do you need for your core competency, and then what do you need to be able to deliver the systems, and then build upon that, right? Versus trying to go alone.
Okay, thank you. With that, unless there are any last minute questions, take one more.
I have a question for, basically, I'm looking at the battery landscape in Silicon Valley right now, and it reminds me of the solar industry maybe 10 years ago. You have companies all over the place trying to make or investigate and commercialize new material system. But on the battery side, you have Tesla that decided we're going to stick with lithium ion no matter what. So from your perspective, do you think has the vast material system been decided for either battery or energy harvesting? I guess energy harvesting is even more complicated because you have different requirements like vibration and solar and all that. So I'm curious if you think the material system has been decided and we should just stick with one system over the other, or do you think there's still investigation that needs to happen?
So fundamentally, the lithium battery costs are actually coming down significantly, and of course, everybody here must have read about Tesla's gigawatt scale factory, somewhere around 15 gigawatt hours, that essentially doubles the lithium battery manufacturing in the world. So you have different requirements for different sectors. So Toyota actually has demonstrated a solid-state battery for an e-bike that is 20% of the volume of the lithium battery. So it demonstrates the potential, but there are really no manufacturing solutions that are robust. The costs are not there. So that's not exactly the right place you want to look at. You want to look at a wearable device. Space is very limited. You need a whole lot of energy compared to what you have today. Otherwise, that device may not even happen. So you have a small form factor. You need an energy device that could be part of your strap, for example. Has a very high operating temperature. Self-discharge is a big deal. I mean, if you can address the self-discharge, the calendar life goes up. So I think there are some areas where you need huge disruption in the energy storage technologies, and once you are up there, presumably you can take those advantages and move up the value chain where you need much, much higher energy density. So the solution is not to try to take this for lithium-ion batteries today, but there are a whole lot of innovations for lithium-ion battery industry. People are looking at silicon-based anodes, for example, that give you higher energy. In general, going with a new material for electric vehicles is an issue because the approval time is roughly around 7 years. So if you have a brand new materials that solves every problem, you're still looking at 7 years before you can make a whole lot of money. So you need to be clever about identifying the problems that require addressing in a specific domain where you have the advantages.
Thank you. With that, I'd like to wrap up the panel and say thank you to all the panelists once again, and hope you have a good evening. Thank you.
Okay, so we thank you very much for having the panel, and before they leave, we're going to present the plaque